Welcome to episode 52 of No Rares Required. Every week I go through a drafting archetype or color pair with the goal of introducing you to the set if you're new to it, but also presenting the strategy that has worked best for me for the specific archetype, and hopefully with the end goal being to get you to draft infinitely so that you can collect all of the cards in the set. So this one, the approach that's been working the best for me is a mid-range ramp strategy, focused on maximizing your 5-drops without compromising your opening hand. So if you go and look at my episode called Discover the Formula, kind of talk about the maximum amount of 5-drops that you typically want in a deck, because if you have too many, then you have the chance of having them in your opening hand, and then you can't play them until turn 5 or turn 4 if you ramp, so they can get kind of clunky. But one of the things that this set has is adventures, and adventures allows you to kind of maximize your top end while treating it like a early spell that you can play before turn 5. So with that, let's get started. Now, one thing to note is there is another way to approach Simic, and the other one, I think the second most popular way to go about it is kind of like blue-red control. And one of the things that green lets you do relatively well is splash different colors. So when you're playing a ramp strategy, one of the best things that you can do is play cheap removal alongside another threat, right? Aggro tends to prefer the larger, the more expensive things like cut in or the 4 or 5 cost removal, because you're okay with just removing a blocker if you already have board presence developed. But in the ramp strategy, you want to disrupt your opponent's plays, but continue to develop at a good pace. And Torch the Tower is one of the best cheap removals in the set. It still performs best in the blue-red Izzet archetype because of bargain synergies, but some of those bargain synergies you can pull into Simic. And I think Simic is its second best archetype. Similarly, Cooped Up is really good cheap white removal and is one of the top performing white commons in the set. And I think that it works incredibly well in Simic for similar reasons to Torch the Tower. We've also got Feed the Cauldron, which I've been relatively unimpressed with Feed the Cauldron. I think usually people think of like Golgari and producing food, and the fact that this destroys a creature with mana value 3 or less means that you're not really going to be trading up in value with it. So I've been like, there's better removal in the set, right? And but I do think it works unusually well in Simic, partially because if you are going down the bargain route with your Hamlet Gluttons and your hatching plans and things like that, then you need fodder to fuel your bargain synergies. And in blue-red, you can use token producers like Ratcatcher Trainee, or you can use treasure off of Red Cap Thief, Grabby Giant, etc. And you don't really have that option in blue-green because you don't have access to red treasure. So it works really nicely to use Feed the Cauldron to get you some food synergies, because that is one thing that green does have. And then the last off-color removal, I promise I'll get to some green and blue cards here, is Candy Grapple. And this one is, it's a removal with bargain synergies. It performs best in Dimir, in my opinion, but it performs well enough in Simic, and you should look, if you're already going to splash, look to pick up some Candy Grapples. But if you're just going to do like what I did, my draft skeleton, I prefer not to splash, and I find it to be kind of like just personal preference, and this set really rewards splashing, so I thought I would at least mention it. But your top performing common that really kind of pushes me into the Simic archetype is Hamlet Glutton, and it is just as good in Simic as it is in Golgari. So as long as you have enough bargain fodder, this comes down as a 6/6 trampler that gains 3 life when it enters the battlefield, and that can just be a ton of pressure for your opponent. There's also Spell Stutter, which I didn't include it in my draft skeleton since I was kind of going towards the strictly green-blue ramp strategy. but it's really great if you are going for the control or attrition route and planning to splash a whole bunch of off-color removal. Then you just want as much removal as possible. Into the Fey Court, I think the worst archetype is Simic, unless you're going the multicolored control route. I did include it in my draft skeleton, and I kept going back and forth on whether or not to include it. You definitely, I don't think, want multiple copies. I've ran a couple of lists that had like 2 or 3 because of being like thinking I was going to be Izzet and then ending up in Simic. And I've found that ramping into a 5-cost draw is not particularly great and can be too slow. You need to get something down on the board eventually, especially if you're kind of on the low side of interaction, which Simic can struggle to find the interaction. So keep it in mind that Into the Fey Court is included in the list, but it is weakest in Simic. Hollow Scavenger I've really liked in every green archetype, being able to create a food on 1. There's not a whole lot else that you're planning to do on turn 1, and then the fact that it turns into a 3/2 that can threaten into becoming a 5/4 is enough that you can usually attack without even having to sacrifice your food. And because it's a good card in every green archetype, I commonly use it as a signal if it's still available around pick 6 or 7 as like, okay, maybe it's time to do some green. And then Root Rider Fawn, I think Simic is its best archetype. I mentioned last week that in Gruul you can also be doing the ramp thing, but in Simic you're pretty much only doing the ramp thing. So the fact that this ramps and fixes for your off-color splash if you're doing the alternative strategy has just been absolutely wonderful. And this is one of those 2-drops that you will definitely aim to pick up. Curse of the Werefox is best in Simic because of the very limited interaction without splashing for off-color things. So if you are strictly just the green-blue Simic and you're not splashing, then you need to value the Curse of the Werefox quite highly. One of the things that I've found nice in this archetype is that it does create a monster role, which can be very good with Balluna's Gatekeeper, the big blue giant, because it doesn't naturally have trample. So that's a nice synergy. And this was the card that I kept going back and forth in my draft skeleton over the Into the Fey Court. And this one fits more of what you're trying to do with the ramp strategy. The only issue is that you kind of have this balancing act, because if you're playing Return from the Wilds, then you want a lot of 5-drops. And you have a lot of 5-drops in Simic and Golgari. And so you could definitely take away one of the Into the Fey Courts and just strictly go for ramping to turn 5. So the more that you've got on your top end, then the more that I think Return from the Wilds really starts to become valuable. And I do like it in the bargain deck specifically because you can create 2 bargain tokens if it's later in the game and you don't need to ramp to further lands. And you can also take advantage of the fact that Return from the Wilds wheels. It's often available very late in the draft. And then we've got Crystal Grotto, which I really like. My 2 favorite archetypes for Crystal Grotto is Izzet and Simic, because both of them are aiming to play off-color, cheap adventures and removal. So the more that you're doing the multicolored strategy, then the more that you should value Crystal Grotto. And then we've got Balluna's Gatekeeper, which this is one of the key cards for extending the number of late-game threats that you're trying to ramp to without clogging down your deck, like I mentioned at the beginning. The fact that you can use this as a 2-cost sorcery and then later play it as a 6-drop allows you to move past the limitation of only having 4 5+ drops in your deck. And it's typically available pretty late. It's not uncommon to find these around pick 7 or 8. I don't commonly anticipate them to wheel, but definitely not looking to pick up very early. We've got Johan's Stopgap, which is it's got good synergies if you have the hatching plans and you find yourself short on some of the other bargain options. Simic is its worst archetype, and so keep that in mind that I think you have better bargain options in blue-green. And then if you have to pay this out for 4 just to bounce something and draw a card, it's not terrible, but it's not particularly good. And but it is available on the wheel, so can help you out if you're short on hitting the 5 bargain that I like to hit with hatching plans. And we've got Misleading Motes, which Simic is its best archetype, but it's still not very impressive. It's good if you're short on interaction, which I try to hit 5 pieces of interaction as a bare minimum, and the more controlling in late game, which, you know, if you're going to the multicolored strategy, then you're going to want 8 pieces of interaction instead of 5. And so this can be good if you're kind of short on that number, and is often available on the wheel. And we've got Diminisher Witch, which did make my draft skeleton because I kind of did the Hatching Plans Simic. Typically, if I find myself in blue, it's because of Hatching Plans. If you don't have Hatching Plans, then the crappy bargain cards like Johann Stopgap and Diminisher Witch clearly drop in value, right? One of the things that's nice about this, though, is that because you are limited in the amount of interaction that you have, turning something into a 1/1 isn't the best removal, but it's sort of it's okay, right? And you can take advantage of this cartwheels. We've got Ice Out, which similarly, same thing as the Diminisher Witch, really. It's good if you have bargain synergies like Hatching Plans, and you can take advantage of the fact that this wheels. And then Sleight of Hand I thought was worth a mention because it is a decent filler option. It helps you find your 5-drops after you've ramped. So one of the problems with the ramp archetype in general is that you get to your 5-drop, you play your 5-drop, and then your opponent removes your 5-drop or counterspells it or whatever, and then you top deck lands, and you don't find any other 5-drops to continue to pressure your opponent. And so Sleight of Hand kind of helps you remedy that and try to dig to your additional late game threats. And it wheels as well, so you can plan on taking these relatively late in the draft. And I should note that I do really like Simic for in-pod drafting. When you're playing against a group of people who are a little bit more educated about what to take, then the quality of the pods, the packs dramatically decrease, right? And so I tend to find myself leaning a little bit more into Simic because there are so many commons, right? There are so many things that you can use that aren't particularly great, but can make a decent deck. So Vantress Transmuter is one of those, it's a much needed piece of interaction, being able to tap a creature and give it a cursed roll. And I like to take advantage of the fact that this cartwheels. And then we've also got Abira's Attendance, which is kind of the same as Balluna's Gatekeeper. It allows you to extend the number of top-end threats that you have in your deck without ruining your opening hands by including too many, because you can use this as an instant to give something -4/-0. But I do prefer the Balluna's Gatekeeper. And these do tend to go a little bit later than the Gatekeeper and are available on the wheel, so it's a decent backup alternative. And then we've got Troublemaker Oof, which I would really only play if you're either, one, incredibly short on 2-drops, or if you have the Hatching Plans synergy. So if you are needing more additional bargain, Troublemaker Oof is definitely an option. And also, it wheels, right? So, there are a ton of cards that wheel in this archetype, which is partly why it's a good backup archetype to have in your drafting arsenal. We've got the Ferocious Werefox, which can kind of work as interaction. It's a combat trick to give +1/+1 and trample. You have to be careful about when you play your cards with adventures into open mana, because they can end up fizzling your creature side if they disrupt its interaction. But one of the things that works nicely, like I mentioned with the monster roll previously with Curse of the Werefox, is that it's a really good way to give your Balluna's Gatekeepers trample and help push through the plethora of little 1/1 chump blockers that are in the set. And Ferocious Werefox is available also on the wheel. We've got the Red Tooth Genealogist, which is another decent filler option. Creates a bargain for your Hamlet Gluttons on turn 5. It really is terrible when you have to play this out as a 2/3 on an empty board, though. And there can be a limited amount of 1s and 2-drops that you're aiming to play in Simic. So only play this if you do have a decent number of 2-drops. So around 6 or 7 2-drops would be ideal, which is why it didn't make my list for the draft skeleton. And you can take these late, around pick 7 or 8. And we've got Leaping Ambush, which is a decent filler option if you're short on interaction and can take advantage of the fact that these are often available on the wheel. And being able to surprise, untap your creature and block, it still is getting people despite being so deep into the set. So I think this one's definitely one that like is undervalued a lot of the time. I know like combat tricks are less valuable than removal, just strictly, but I do find that Leaping Ambush, especially with the reach, has been a handy combat trick. We've got Candy Trail, which is good for scrying to your threats. So similar to the Sleight of Hand, once you get to the late game part where you need to find your 5-drops, Candy Trail is really good for that, right? You can scry 2, if they're both not 5s, you can put them down, and then you can tap 2 to draw cards. So you can like use this as a way to get through 3 cards of your deck to help find your threats. And then we've got Prophetic Prism, which is great if you're splashing for the off-color removal or doing any form of splashes, and is available pretty late, usually around pick 7 or 8. And then also Evolving Wilds, which is great if you're splashing for the off-color removal and is available a little bit short of the wheel. You don't usually see these pick 8 and onward, but you do see them around pick 6, pick 7. Okay, so now for the uncommons, and Simic has 2 mythic level uncommons that I'm very excited to open, and one of them is Gingerbread Hunter. It still performs the best in Golgari, where you don't have to splash the black, but I think Simic is its best, second best archetype, and it fits the strategy of what Simic is trying to do perfectly. It's a 5/5 5-drop late game threat that creates a food token that you can use for life gain or for additional bargain synergies, and then before you play it down as a 5/5, as long as you have splashed for black, you can use it as removal, which gives you that much needed interaction in this archetype. And then the other mythic level uncommon is Welcome to Sweet Tooth. I still prefer it in Golgari because of the dream curve of Hollow Scavenger, create a food on 1, Welcome to Sweet Tooth, and then Welcome to Sweet Tooth Witch, or Welcome to Sweet Tooth Witch, Sweet Tooth Witch on 3, just gives you the perfect curve for a absolute +4/+4 on turn 4 from Welcome to Sweet Tooth. But it's still really great in every green archetype. And then we've got Tough Cookie, which didn't quite make the mythic level uncommon for me in Simic, just because you're trying to use your early mana to ramp into your 5-drop threats, and so you're not really going to be playing this on turn 2 and then swinging for 6 on turn 3 like you might in some other more aggressive archetypes like Gruul. And it's still a really great green. It's still a really great green card, right? A 2/2 that spawns a food, and then also has the ability to sacrifice to gain life and to pay 3 to threaten to create a 4/4 is still a great green card that I'm excited to open up. And we've got Hatching Plans, which I still find best in Izzet. Just the red options for bargain are slightly better than in Simic. But anytime that you're in blue, blue alone has enough bargain synergies to get to the 5 to make Hatching Plans work. And this is a really great way to refuel into a whole new hand and just overwhelm your opponent with value. Then we've got Archive Dragon, which I think Simic is its best archetype. The Scry 2 works incredibly well to find your other late game threats, and you can pay the double pip blue without being blue as your main color. So you don't need the like 9 sources of blue if you count Fawn and Return to the Wilds and things like that as blue sources. You can kind of cheese this one out pretty easily, and then it's a really great late game threat. And then we've got Royal Treatment, which is, I've been impressed with this in every green archetype. Nothing special about it in Simic, other than, protecting your 5-drops from removal is pretty good. And you really want to try to fizzle something from your opponent with this, right? Like if you're just using this as a +1/+1 combat trick, then it's not super great. But being able to, like, oh, they finally got an answer for your Archive Dragon, and they pay the ward, and then you give it hexproof, and you're left behind with a 5/7 ward 3 creature, right? Like, there's just some really fun synergies with this card, and I've been very impressed with it. Then we've got Utopia Sprawl, which is good in every green archetype, and it fits the ramp or the splash strategy just like Fawn, and been very impressed with it in Simic. Agatha's Champion is especially nice if you have the hatching plans. It's a little bit less important if you aren't going into the bargain strategy specifically. Like, I would rather have a Gingerbread Hunter than Agatha's Champion, but I decided to go with the Agatha's Champion over Gingerbread Hunter in my draft skeleton because of doing the hatching plans strategy. So you kind of, think about what you want as your like hardcore 5-drops, and then put a little bit of additional ones like Stormkeld Vanguard. This is another one that sort of like Balluna's Gatekeeper, a little less so because the disenchant doesn't necessarily have as good a target, but it still allows you to do something until you get to turn 6 when you play this out, and it's just a really great late game threat. And notably, it does work with hatching plans in a pinch. You can pay 2 to destroy your own hatching plans. And then last thing that I want to point out is that most of the uncommons that I'm excited to play that I just covered are green. So if you look back at the draft skeleton, you'll notice that the majority color that I prefer in Simic is green. And partially just because of the fixing in green allows you to play the other colors more easily, and just gives you better options for, like, Stormkeld Vanguard. You don't want to play when you aren't majority green because of the double pip. All right, and with that, we got to the rares. We've got Horned Lock Whale, which has been very impressive in Simic. I think that it is best in Simic and Izzet, both equally. But for slightly different reasons. In Izzet, you're looking for control and the 2-cost instant for putting their attacking creature on the bottom of their library, or time walking their draw, or making them repeat their draw with the Lagoon Breach has been very impressive. And then in Simic, it fits the strategy of, like, it's a 5-drop that lets you do something earlier in the game. So we've also got Gruff Triplets, which I've found to be a top-performing rare in every green archetype, and Simic is no exception. But I decided to go with the Goose Mother as my chosen rare for the draft skeleton. And it's best in Simic because you don't have to splash, and this thing has just been a very impressive threat. It curves out very nicely, right? Like, you can play this as a 2-drop in a pinch to pressure your opponent and win. You can play this as a 5-drop and get a whole bunch of food tokens and help you get card draw. So the versatility of when you play this on your curve is fantastic, and is just it's got to be the best. It's got to be the best rare, right? And then we've also got Fawn's Bane Troll, which I've mentioned this one before in a lot of my archetypes. I think this one's probably my most splashed card, because anytime that I'm in black and anytime that I'm in green, with very, very few exceptions, if I open up a Fawn's Bane Troll, I'm going to try to figure out how to splash for it. Just because, a 4/4 for 4 that, or I guess a 5/5 for 4 that comes in and immediately acts like Agatha's Champion, but you can repeat it if you have additional role synergies with, like, Ferocious Werefox. Just been very impressed with this card, and I think you should look to splash it. And then we've also got Sleep Cursed Fairy, which it's not it's not amazing to play a turn 1 Sleep Cursed Fairy in Simic. I do think it's better in Dimir, where you have fairy synergies, but it's a good threat in any blue deck, and so if you have it, play it, right? And then lastly, for the rares, we've got Talion's Messenger, which again is another one that I think is best in Dimir because of the fairy synergies. And you're playing a 1/3 that by itself, without any other fairies, grows into a 2/4 and then a 3/5, and the whole time it is looting and helping you find additional stuff. It's just been a very impressive, top-performing blue rare, and should be included if you have the opportunity. And then the one that we'll close things off with is Balluna Grand Squall. And if the only 2-color deck that you're really going to be, like, looking to play this card and then splash the red for is Simic. And but it does fit quite well, right? Even just as a 4/4 trampler that gives all of your other adventures one less to cast, you have a fair amount of adventures that you're aiming to play in this archetype because it extends your number of 5-drops. And then you have the ability to play this later in the game as a 5-cost instant to mill 7 and put all of the adventure cards drawn that way into your hand, or milled that way into your hand. So if there is a deck that you're going to Plague Balloon as Grand Squall, it's going to be Simic. So with that, thank you for watching to the end of the video. I hope it gets you helps get you those trophies and draft infinitely. I post multiple videos a week, ranging from standard to limited, and so remember to hit like and subscribe for more Magic the Gathering content. We only have 2 archetypes left, Dimir and Azorius. So let me know in the comments below if you have a preference of which one I should cover next. And as always, thank you all for the support.